Jake, a dedicated barista at a popular Starbucks, noticed a homeless man shivering outside the cafe. Against company policy, he offered him a warm drink and a sandwich. His act of kindness was caught on security cameras, and the next day, he was fired for unauthorized giveaways. But what happened next was unbelievable. Would you risk it all for kindness?
Welcome to Hall of Gentle Stories. Where are you watching from? Let's know in the comment below. Make sure you see this amazing story till the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. Let's begin.
It was just another freezing morning in New York City. The streets buzzed with impatient commuters, heads down, eyes glued to their phones. Inside a Starbucks near Times Square, the air was thick with the scent of espresso and the sound of steaming milk. It was business as usual, orders shouted, cups marked, money exchanged. And then, Jake saw him. A man huddled outside the cafe, trembling in the biting cold. His coat was nothing more than a thin rag, his hands raw and red. People passed him without a glance, like he didn't exist. Jake's heart pounded. He knew what he was about to do. He knew it was against the rules. But what he didn't know was that one small act of kindness would cost him everything. What happened next? No one, not even Jake, could have seen it coming. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he wiped down the counter, his gaze drifting back to the man outside. The morning rush at the Starbucks near Times Square roared on, orders flying in, the hiss of espresso machines, and the distant honk of yellow taxis layering the soundscape. But Jake barely heard any of it. His focus was locked on the figure just beyond the glass. The homeless man sat hunched against the wall, his breath visible in the icy air. His fingers, raw and stiff, clutched a torn beanie, and his coat, if you could even call it that, was so thin it did nothing to shield him from the cold. People passed him without a glance. Some even stepped farther away as if the mere act of acknowledging him would stain their morning routine. Jake swallowed hard. He knew the rules. The store manager had made them clear more than once: no freebies, no exceptions. Everything had to be accounted for, every transaction logged. Any act of charity, no matter how small, could be seen as theft. But was it really theft to help someone who had nothing? The question gnawed at Jake's conscience. His heart told him one thing, but the voice of his manager echoed in his mind, warning of consequences. For a moment, he stood frozen behind the counter, torn between the rulebook and his own sense of right and wrong. Then, without a word, Jake moved. He grabbed a paper bag and slipped in a breakfast sandwich, warm, fresh, untouched. His fingers found the cup next, pouring hot coffee, steam curling into the air. He added a splash of cream, a pinch of sugar, small details, but enough to make the drink comforting. Jake's heart pounded harder now, not from fear of breaking the rules, but from the overwhelming sense that he was doing something that mattered. With a quick glance at the security camera mounted in the corner, its tiny red light blinking, he tucked the bag and the coffee into a to-go cup holder and stepped outside. The cold slapped him in the face, but he barely noticed. He knelt down beside the man, who looked up, startled, his eyes wide, uncertain. Jake didn't speak, didn't make a show of it. He just placed the food and drink beside him, offering a small nod. For a split second, their eyes met. Gratitude, confusion, hope, all swirling in the man's silent expression. Jake turned back toward the cafe, his heart still racing. What he didn't know was that the camera had caught everything. And someone was already watching the footage. Jake thought he had just shown a quiet act of kindness, but what he didn't realize was that this one small moment would soon be twisted into something far bigger than he ever could have imagined. And it would cost him more than he was prepared to lose. The next morning started like any other. Jake clocked in at 6 a.m., tying his green apron with a practiced motion. The smell of fresh coffee beans and pastries filled the air, and the familiar hum of the espresso machine was almost comforting. But something felt off. His manager, Mr. Reynolds, a stern, by-the-book man in his 50s, stood by the counter, arms crossed, his gaze sharp as a blade. There was no friendly good morning or nod of acknowledgement, just a cold, unblinking stare. Before Jake could ask what was wrong, Mr. Reynolds spoke. "Jake, in my office. Now." The words hit like a slap. Co-workers exchanged quick glances, whispering as Jake wiped his hands on his apron and followed Mr. Reynolds to the back room. The small office was as sterile as ever, gray walls, a worn desk, a stack of corporate handbooks piled neatly in the corner. But today it felt like a courtroom. Mr. Reynolds didn't waste time. "We reviewed the security footage from yesterday." Jake's heart skipped. The sandwich, the coffee, the homeless man. He opened his mouth to explain, but Mr. Reynolds slid a printed frame from the footage across the desk. A blurry image of Jake handing over the bag and cup. Company policy strictly prohibits unauthorized giveaways, Mr. Reynolds said, his voice devoid of emotion. What you did is considered theft. Jake blinked. Theft. The word sounded absurd. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. I was just helping someone who was hungry. It was a sandwich. A coffee. That's all. But Mr. Reynolds' face remained stone cold. It doesn't matter if it was a sandwich or a car, Jake. It was company property. You gave it away without permission. Jake stared at him, waiting for some sign of empathy, some crack in the manager's icy tone. But there was none. The decision had already been made. We have no choice but to let you go, Mr. Reynolds said flatly. Just like that. No warning. No second chance. Jake's apron suddenly felt heavier, his chest tightening with disbelief. So I'm being fired for feeding a hungry man? His voice cracked, more from shock than anger. Mr. Reynolds didn't answer. Instead, he slid a termination form across the desk. You can gather your things now. It wasn't just the words, it was the coldness. The mechanical way Jake's kindness had been twisted into a crime. As he walked back through the cafe to grab his coat, Jake felt the weight of silent stares from his coworkers. Whispers. The same people he had worked beside for months now looked at him like he was a criminal. And the homeless man? Nowhere to be seen. Jake stepped outside, his mind a blur. Fired. For a sandwich. But as the winter wind bit at his skin, one thought clung to him like a shadow. Was helping someone really a punishable offense? What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. What Jake didn't know as he walked home that day, coat clutched tight against the biting Chicago wind, was that his story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Somewhere in the corner of the cafe the day before, a customer had been recording. A shaky, vertical phone video just over a minute long captured the entire moment. Jake quietly making the sandwich, pouring the coffee, the homeless man's surprised smile. And then the bag and cup passed across the counter with a soft, "Here you go." The caption was simple but piercing. This barista just got fired for feeding a homeless man. Are you kidding me? The video hit TikTok at 8:42 p.m. that night. By sunrise, it had 4.2 million views. The comment section was a wildfire. He did something good and got punished. Make it make sense. This is what's wrong with the world. Humanity costs nothing. Boycott Starbucks until they fix this. And then, Starbucks' official social media pages were hit hard. Their latest Instagram post, a simple picture of a latte art heart, was flooded with thousands of comments. Rehire Jake. Firing someone for being kind? Disgusting. What happened to community and compassion? It wasn't just TikTok anymore. The story spread like wildfire across platforms, Twitter, Facebook, even YouTube reaction channels picking it up. By noon, major news outlets like CNN, NBC, and the New York Times were reaching out, running headlines like, "Barista fired for feeding homeless man sparks national outrage." Jake's phone buzzed nonstop, old friends, distant family members, even people he hadn't spoken to since high school, all asking the same thing. Is this really you? But Jake wasn't ready for what happened next. His name wasn't just trending, it was becoming a symbol. A symbol of compassion clashing with corporate rules. A symbol of kindness being punished. People weren't just angry, they were furious. And somewhere, behind the scenes, Starbucks' PR team was scrambling. But the damage was already done. Jake's quiet act of kindness, meant for no one's eyes but his own, had become a nationwide storm. And the world was watching. By the time the sun set over Chicago that evening, Jake's name wasn't just trending, it was a movement. Hashtag Justice for Jake exploded across Twitter, climbing to the #1 spot within hours. It wasn't just everyday people speaking out, celebrities and influencers added fuel to the fire. Ellen DeGeneres tweeted, "A guy gets fired for feeding someone in need? Come on, at Starbucks, do better." Hashtag Justice for Jake. LeBron James posted, "Kindness should never cost someone their job. This ain't right." Hashtag Stand with Jake. Even TikTok creators with millions of followers joined the cause, some recreating the moment, others rallying their fans to sign online petitions demanding Starbucks rehire Jake. Within 24 hours, a Change.org petition titled "Rehire Jake, Compassion Isn't a Crime" gathered over 300,000 signatures. But Starbucks' response? Cold. Corporate. Unmoving. A brief statement posted across their social media accounts read, "At Starbucks, we value kindness and community, but we have clear policies regarding unauthorized giveaways. We stand by our decision. No apology. No sympathy. Just policy." The backlash was instant. "We value kindness, but not when it's inconvenient for your bottom line. Policies over people, classic corporate nonsense." Translation, profits over compassion. But not everyone sided with Jake. A small but vocal group defended the company, arguing, "Rules are rules. If everyone gave away free food, they'd go out of business." It's sad, but he broke policy. Companies have to draw the line somewhere. Starbucks isn't a charity. The manager did their job. The internet became a battlefield, compassion versus corporate loyalty. Jake wasn't just a barista anymore, he was a symbol, a spark igniting a nationwide debate. But as the comments raged on, Jake sat alone in his small apartment, scrolling through it all, the support, the hate, the petitions, the news headlines, wondering, would any of this actually fix the life that had just been shattered? Days passed. The noise online only grew louder, but for Jake, silence. His phone, once buzzing non-stop with calls from reporters, now lay still on his kitchen counter. The glow of his laptop screen was the only light in his dim apartment, showing a constant stream of comments, some kind, others cruel. His savings were running low. Job applications were met with polite rejections or worse, no response at all. To most companies, he wasn't a hero. He was a liability, a guy who broke company policy. Jake scrolled through his emails. More notifications, more interviews he didn't want to give. His heart sank. And then, there it was, a new email. The subject line? "We need people like you." Jake blinked. Was this a prank? Another reporter fishing for a story? But as he opened the email, his heart raced. It was from David Caldwell, the CEO of Bright Horizons Corporation, a Fortune 500 company known for its focus on social impact and corporate responsibility. The message was simple. "Jake, I saw the video. Integrity and compassion are rare qualities in today's world. We need people like you at Bright Horizons. Let's talk." Jake read the words over and over again. Was this real? He quickly searched David Caldwell's name. It wasn't a scam. It wasn't a joke. This was the real CEO of a billion-dollar company. Jake's fingers trembled as he replied, "Thank you for reaching out. I'd love to discuss this further." Within minutes, a reply. A Zoom meeting was set for the next morning. Jake sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, heart pounding, mind spinning. Just days ago, he was a fired barista, ridiculed for his kindness. Now, an opportunity he never saw coming. But the question remained, was this his shot at a fresh start, or just another headline waiting to happen? Jake could barely sleep that night. His mind raced with what ifs. What if this was too good to be true? What if his past still haunted him? But the next morning, dressed in a crisp button-up shirt and borrowed tie, he logged onto the Zoom call. David Caldwell's face appeared calm, confident, the kind of leader Jake never thought he'd speak to. "Jake," David smiled, "we're not hiring you despite what happened at Starbucks. We're hiring you because of it." And just like that, Jake's new chapter began. His first day at Bright Horizons felt surreal. Unlike the cold, rule-obsessed atmosphere of his old job, there was warmth here, a genuine sense of purpose. His new team greeted him not with side eyes or whispers, but with handshakes and nods of respect. "You're the guy from the video," one colleague said. "The guy who chose kindness over a policy book." Jake wasn't just the fired barista anymore. He was now Bright Horizons' new community engagement coordinator, a role focused on social impact projects, helping the company build programs for feeding the homeless and supporting local shelters. His story wasn't a stain on his resume, it was an asset. Then something unexpected happened. David Caldwell went public. In a press conference that made headlines, the CEO addressed the controversy. "Rules matter," he said, "but compassion matters more. Companies must never punish their employees for doing the right thing." The internet exploded again. The hashtag Justice for Jake evolved into hashtag Kindness Over Rules, a new movement calling for companies to rethink their policies on empathy and human decency. Jake's inbox flooded with messages, not just from supporters, but from other workers sharing their own stories of being punished for small acts of kindness. He was no longer a silent victim of corporate injustice, he had become a symbol of standing up for what's right. And as the news spread, so did the celebrations. People tweeted their congratulations. Influencers praised his resilience. Even celebrities chimed in, applauding Bright Horizons for giving Jake a platform. But for Jake, it wasn't about the fame. It was about finally being seen, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person who chose compassion over convenience. His journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jake's story was no longer just about him. It had become something bigger. What started as a single act of kindness, a simple sandwich and a warm drink, had now ignited a nationwide movement. The hashtag kindness at work began trending, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences. Moments where they chose compassion over rules, and the consequences they faced. A nurse in Ohio posted about how she was reprimanded for staying overtime to comfort a grieving family. A grocery store cashier in Texas shared how he was written up for giving a free loaf of bread to a mother who couldn't pay. Even a flight attendant in California revealed how she was once scolded for offering an elderly passenger an extra blanket on a cold flight. Stories poured in, raw, emotional, and, at times, heartbreaking. But something incredible started happening. Major companies, ones far bigger than Starbucks, began to notice the backlash. Within days, Target released a statement promising to review their internal policies on employee compassion. Walmart announced a new initiative, allowing store managers to make discretionary decisions when it came to small acts of kindness. And then, the most unexpected twist. Starbucks, the very company that fired Jake, broke their silence. Not with another cold corporate statement, but with a public promise. "We realize kindness should never be a fireable offense," their CEO said in a live-streamed press conference. "We're launching a new program to empower our employees to act with empathy and compassion, without fear of losing their jobs." The crowd erupted in applause. It was a rare moment. A massive corporation admitting its mistake. But it wasn't just about policies. Jake's story lit a spark in ordinary people, too. Random acts of kindness started going viral, paying for strangers' groceries, leaving generous tips for servers, and surprising homeless people with meals. And every time someone in the comments would write, "This one's for Jake," Jake himself couldn't believe it. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't some larger-than-life figure. He was just a guy who gave a sandwich to someone in need and got fired for it. But somehow that small act, that moment, had grown into something unstoppable. A national conversation. A movement. A ripple effect that kept spreading, one kind act at a time. And Jake? He watched it all unfold, not as a victim anymore, but as a symbol of how one person, one choice, can change everything. Just when the world thought Jake's story had reached its final chapter, there was one more twist no one saw coming. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Jake had just finished a long day at his new job when he noticed an envelope waiting for him at the front desk. No return address. Just his name. Curious, he opened it and inside was a handwritten note. "Jake, you probably don't remember me, but I'll never forget you. You didn't just give me a sandwich that day, you gave me dignity." It was signed simply, Michael. Jake's heart stopped. Michael. The homeless man he had helped that day outside Starbucks. The man whose quiet thank you had cost Jake his job but sparked a movement. Overwhelmed, Jake set the note down and wiped his eyes. He had wondered about Michael for weeks, where he had gone, if he was okay. And now here he was reaching out. But that wasn't the end. A few days later, Jake and Michael finally met again, this time not on a cold sidewalk, but at a small diner in downtown Seattle. Michael looked different. Cleaner. His clothes, though worn, were neatly pressed. His eyes, the same ones Jake had seen filled with sadness, now held a spark of hope. As they sat across from each other, Michael shared his story. He wasn't always homeless. He was a veteran, once stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington. After his service, life took a cruel turn. A string of bad luck, the death of a loved one, and mounting medical bills had pushed him onto the streets. "I wasn't just hungry that day, Jake," Michael said softly. "I was invisible. No one looked at me until you did." Jake could barely speak, but what Michael said next stunned him. After seeing Jake's story explode online, Michael realized something. If Jake could lose everything just for helping a stranger, then maybe it was time for him to start helping himself. Inspired by the outpouring of support Jake received, Michael checked himself into a local shelter that partnered with veterans. He started attending counseling sessions. He applied for job training programs. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. The internet had rallied behind Jake, but unknowingly it had also given Michael the push he needed to reclaim his life. As their meeting ended, Michael reached across the table and gripped Jake's hand. "You saved me, Jake," he whispered. "In more ways than one." The reunion, once unthinkable, was now a reality, two men forever connected by one simple act of kindness. But this time, they weren't just a barista and a homeless man. They were two people both given a second chance. And somewhere out there, the ripple effect of Jake's compassion continued, touching lives they hadn't even met yet. In a world governed by rules and consequences, sometimes the heart knows best. Jake's story wasn't just about a sandwich or a sudden firing. It was about principles over policies. About a simple act of kindness that rippled far beyond a single moment, touching millions of lives. He went from a barista standing behind a counter, quietly offering a homeless man a meal, to a national symbol of compassion catapulted into the spotlight. But the most powerful part of Jake's journey wasn't his new job or the viral fame, it was the unshakable truth his story revealed. Real success isn't measured by titles or paychecks. It's measured by the courage to stand by your values, even when it costs you everything. Because here's the hard truth, kindness isn't always convenient. It may not fit neatly into a company policy or align with a corporate rulebook. Sometimes choosing to do what's right means risking something, your job, your reputation, even your future. But Jake's story proved something even more important. What you lose for being kind will never outweigh what you gain. Because while Starbucks saw Jake as a rule breaker, the world saw him as a hero. And when one person stands up for what's right, it inspires others to do the same. That's why his story sparked a national conversation. That's why Michael, the man he helped, found the strength to rebuild his life. And that's why the hashtag kindness at work became more than a trend, it became a movement. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Would you risk everything to help someone in need? Would you choose compassion even if it meant facing the consequences? It's easy to think kindness is just a soft virtue, something simple and small. But Jake's story reminds us of a powerful truth. Kindness is brave. Kindness is bold. And kindness always wins. What would you have done in Jake's place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because your voice matters. And remember, never stop spreading kindness.
Hey there. Thank you so much for watching till the very end. We really appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And guess what? The story doesn't end here. Click on the video right here on your screen to dive into another fascinating story. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Once again, thanks for being a part of this amazing community. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring stories that move you.